They called 911 on my wife for parking in her own driveway. The woman banging on my front door at 6 a.m. wasn't delivering newspapers or raising funds for a school bake sale. She was holding her phone in one hand, already dialed to 911, her finger hovering like a missile launch key. She stood rigid, her eyes wide and unblinking, her voice shaking with self-righteous fury. "She's trespassing," the woman shrieked, pointing past me. "That woman is not allowed here." I stood there half awake in a bathrobe, coffee steaming in my mug, stunned silent while my wife Elena, still in scrubs from a night shift in the pediatric ICU, watched from behind me. That woman, the one this stranger wanted arrested, had just finished saving a child's life a few hours ago. The woman at the door was Brenda Kensington, president of our HOA, and apparently she thought she ruled the entire street. Brenda was the type who trimmed her hedges with a tape measure, who checked grass height like a city inspector, who saw community rules not as guidelines, but as gospel, ones she'd weaponized for years with a clipboard and a sneer. But today, she had no clipboard. She had 911. Elena had moved in just a few days earlier. We'd been married 6 months. But between her night shifts at the hospital and our renovation delays, she hadn't officially relocated until now. That weekend, she parked her Honda Civic in our driveway. One car, no blocking the sidewalk, no oil leaks, just a clean, small, unassuming car, with a stethoscope visible through the rear window. That was the problem, apparently. Brenda squinted at Elena's car like it was a biohazard. "Medical equipment on residential property," she hissed earlier in the week, standing with her arms crossed in our yard, clipboard balanced on her hip. "This is clearly commercial use. It's a violation." Commercial use? It was a nurse's bag, blood pressure cuff, clipboard, a few textbooks, the tools she uses to keep children alive. But Brenda didn't see a nurse. She saw an enemy of the order. She'd already issued a $150 violation notice, tapped it onto the windshield like a sheriff pinning a bounty. Now, it was criminal trespassing. "Elena is my wife," I said calmly. "She lives here. Here's our deed, and here's our marriage license." I held out the documents like a peace offering. Brenda didn't even look. Her finger tightened above the call button. "No one moves in without HOA approval," she snapped. "And I never approved. This person." That phrase, "this person," made something inside me go ice cold. Behind me, I could feel Elena stiffen, her hand tightening on the box of textbooks she'd carried from her car only minutes before. Her face, tired from another 12-hour shift in the NICU, looked like it had just taken a slap, and that's when it hit me. Brenda wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to erase Elena. That night, we sat at the kitchen table in silence. Elena still hadn't changed out of her scrubs. The smell of hospital antiseptic clung faintly to her hands as she traced the rim of her coffee mug. "Maybe we should just pay the fine," she whispered. "I don't want to cause problems." That's who Brenda was counting on. People like Elena. Good people. Quiet people. People who heal others and never ask for anything in return. But that's where she miscalculated, because she picked the wrong couple. 3 days later, I answered the door to a man in a county uniform. Clipboard, official tone. "Code enforcement," he said, almost apologetically. "We received an anonymous complaint about this address. Something about an unlicensed medical operation." I laughed. I couldn't help it. He glanced around the living room. 2 bedrooms, 1 married couple. No boarders. No equipment beyond a nurse's handbag by the door. I figured. He sighed. "We've had a few of these lately. Same person files them." I nodded. "Let me guess. Brenda?" He gave a look that said, "You didn't hear it from me." But Brenda wasn't done. That afternoon, Elena came home from the hospital, pale and quiet. She didn't even sit down before speaking. "Someone called the hospital," she said, barely above a whisper. They said I was misusing medical supplies, that I was unstable. She said it like she couldn't believe it. I couldn't either. I stood there speechless as Elena stared at the floor like it had answers. They laughed it off, she continued. They know me, but still. The word she didn't say hurt the most. Still. Someone was trying to ruin her. Strip away her reputation. Tear down everything she worked so hard to build. Anonymous notes started appearing a few days later. Printed in block letters, no return address, one tucked under our windshield. Keep our neighborhood family friendly. Another in the mailbox. Some people don't belong here. I knew the stationery. The cream-colored paper matched the official HOA memos Brenda sent every month. Elena didn't say anything when she saw them. She just nodded, turned, and walked inside. But the final straw came Thursday. A deep gouge carved across the passenger door of Elena's Honda Civic, like someone dragged a key the entire length of it, metal exposed, paint peeled back like skin, from a wound. Elena stood next to the car, silent. Her shoulders sagged, her breath short. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stared at the damage with the same numb, exhausted expression I'd seen her wear, leaving trauma rooms. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table with a highlighter and a copy of our HOA bylaws, flipping. Pages like a detective reviewing crime scene photos. 47 pages of legal jargon. But somewhere in that stack was my weapon. My father used to say, when someone uses the rules against you, learn the rules better than they do. Turns out Brenda had her own skeletons. Her backyard fence? 6 feet 8 inches tall. The bylaws limit it to 6 feet. I measured it myself. Her prized deck addition? No permit. No approval. Built with expensive composite materials that easily pushed it past $15,000, more than triple the HOA's approval limit. But that was just the start. HOAs are required to enforce rules fairly, equally. You can't fine one neighbor for grass height while ignoring someone else's illegal deck. That's discrimination. And it's right there in the fine print. Section 6.4, subparagraph C, consistency. Equity, Brenda had neither. Friday morning, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board. Not just about the fines. I attached photos, dates, witness reports, every violation Brenda committed, cataloged like evidence in a courtroom, but I didn't stop there. I requested an emergency board meeting, and when Monday night came, I was ready. Brenda walked into the meeting with her usual clique of loyal followers, confident, smirking, ready to throw another public fit. But what she found was me, calm, sitting at the end of the table with a folder thick enough to crush a bug. Before anyone else could speak, I cleared my throat. Before we discuss any matters involving my wife, I began, I'd like to raise some concerns regarding leadership accountability. I passed out copies of the evidence, photos of the fence, receipts from the building department, documentation of every fine she'd ever issued to Elena, next to her own, far worse violations. Brenda's face turned a new shade of red with every page turned. "This is harassment," she barked. "These complaints are retaliatory. Marcus is just mad because the tape measure is lying?" I asked. Silence, then murmurs. Then whispers. Even her own board allies were suddenly looking at her differently. But I wasn't done. I stood up slowly, facing the people she'd controlled for years. "Selective enforcement is discrimination," I said. "It's illegal. And it's about to get a lot more public than she ever wanted." Brenda stormed out before the meeting ended, but the real storm was only beginning, because when you shine light into dark corners, cockroaches don't like what they see. The camera across the street wasn't hiding anymore. Tuesday morning, I stepped onto the porch with my coffee and saw the same dull gray sedan that had been there yesterday. Different angle, same man, same telephoto lens pointed straight at our house. He didn't flinch when I stared back. Brenda had hired a private investigator. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but Elena confirmed it later that day, her voice tight over the phone. He followed me to the grocery store, she whispered. He waited in the parking lot, then trailed me to the hospital. Her voice cracked. That was the moment I realized. We weren't dealing with a petty neighbor anymore. We were targets in Brenda's personal war. Elena had only just started sleeping again. Her appetite was coming back, slowly. And now this, surveillance. Intimidation, a stranger tailing her while she tried to buy groceries after a night of keeping premature babies alive. That evening, I pored over the HOA bylaws again while Elena scrubbed the scent of hospital stress from her skin. And that's when I remembered something her father had said at our wedding. If you ever have to deal with an HOA nightmare, he'd warned, keep records. Bullies rely on silence. But documentation? That's your sword. I took that sword and called an attorney. Her name was Sarah Martinez, HOA litigation specialist, former civil prosecutor, voice like a judge, and the tired edge of someone who's seen it all before. When HOA enforcement becomes targeted or retaliatory, she said, it crosses a legal line, especially if it's tied to housing discrimination or hostile environment, harassment. She paused. I've won cases like this, but only when the victims document everything. We had already started. Photos, dates, copies of every fine, every anonymous letter, every code complaint. But Martinez gave us one more tool. Request 3 years of HOA financials, budgets, contracts, expenses. If she's this aggressive, there's usually more going on. I didn't know it then, but those records would break everything wide open. Friday morning, I sent the formal request to the board. By Sunday, Brenda was panicking. She sent out an email to all residents. Emergency HOA security assessment. $800 per household. Pay within 30 days or face liens. She cited recent disruptive behavior and vaguely blamed residents undermining community safety. The timing wasn't a coincidence. Neither was the fact that her husband's landscaping company, Kensington Gardens LLC, was listed as the emergency contractor. She was trying to fund her private war, using our money. That weekend, we started. Hearing from neighbors, the Johnsons called. The Pattersons stopped by with coffee and questions. One by one, people who'd stayed quiet during Brenda's reign of citations and surveillance started reaching out. No one liked surprise $800 bills, especially not from someone they barely remembered electing. We were no longer alone. But Brenda wasn't finished. Monday morning, Elena came home from her night shift to find our mailbox destroyed. Not dented, not tipped over, annihilated. The metal door was twisted like a car wreck. Pieces scattered across the lawn. And across the garage door, in angry red spray paint, one word dripped down the white paint like blood: liar. I watched Elena freeze in the driveway, her hospital bag still slung over her shoulder, exhaustion etched into every line of her face. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. Our security cameras caught the whole thing. 4:07 a.m. A hooded figure, broad shoulders, fast gait, used our driveway to turn around, briefly exposing a partial license plate. The silver sedan matched Brenda's. Elena recognized her walk. I recognized the fury in her movements. We called Detective Walsh, a neighbor who lived 3 blocks over. He watched the footage, expression unreadable. Destroying a mailbox is a federal offense, he said, tapping his pen against his notepad. Add vandalism, harassment, trespassing, and witness intimidation? That's felony territory. He took the footage, filed the report, promised to escalate it, but Brenda wasn't done. Wednesday morning brought flyers, slipped into every mailbox. Cream-colored cardstock, the same expensive paper Brenda used for official HOA memos. Her signature at the bottom. The headline, "Protect our community from false accusations and lawsuits." She claimed a group of troublemakers, us, were trying to eliminate neighborhood standards and destroy peaceful living. Brenda was digging her own grave with a golden shovel, but the damage was done. Elena's hospital got another call. This, one more insidious. A report claiming she was mentally compromised from neighborhood disputes and posed a danger to children under her care. The hospital administration thankfully knew better. Her supervisor, Dr. Rachel Morrison, called us immediately. "This is targeted harassment," she said. "It's over the line. I'm reporting this to hospital security, and I'll be documenting this as workplace harassment in case she tries again." Elena didn't say much that night. She just sat at the kitchen table, staring at a file of her own medical records, ones she had to start keeping on herself. "I've developed chronic headaches," she said quietly. "High blood pressure, anxiety. I've lost 8 pounds in 3 weeks. She flipped through the pages, voice steady but distant. "This isn't just harassment. This is affecting my health." I sat across from her, unable to speak. The woman who kept children alive with calm hands and warm eyes was being broken down by a woman with a clipboard and a grudge. That's when we decided to go door to door. Tom Martinez, our retired accountant neighbor, helped build a financial presentation that broke everything down. How much money Brenda funneled to her husband's company, how every contract over $5,000 violated HOA bylaws, how no competitive bids had ever been filed. He even color-coded it for the elderly neighbors. Elena used her ICU skills to create a timeline. Harassment, incidents on one axis, fraudulent payments on the other. It told a damning story. Every time someone questioned Brenda, a mysterious landscaping emergency drained the community budget. We spent that weekend handing out copies. Most neighbors weren't just horrified, they were angry. Not just because Brenda had abused her position, but because she had used their money to do it. Mrs. Patterson's $200 fine for excessive garden decor coincided perfectly with a $12,000 emergency sprinkler repair to Kensington Gardens, LLC. By Sunday night, we had confirmations from 28 out of 31 households. They would attend the HOA meeting on Monday. We weren't just fighting back, we were building an army. Sarah Chen, an investigative reporter from the local paper, reached out that same night. She'd been investigating HOA corruption across the county. "Your story," she said, "might be the biggest one I've ever heard." She showed up with her camera crew. Detective Walsh agreed to attend the meeting in his personal capacity. Badge on his belt, message clear. Brenda still thought she could stop the flood with duct tape. Monday night arrived, and the community center buzzed with attention you could feel through your shoes. Brenda showed up late, strutting in with Frank behind her like they were walking into a gala. Dorothy Pratt and Bill Morrison followed closely. Her only remaining allies, their expressions visibly strained. But the room had changed. This wasn't Brenda's kingdom anymore. As the meeting began, she attempted to seize control with her usual theatrics. "I want to address these malicious rumors." "Point of order," Tom Martinez said, standing with quiet force. "First order of business is the financial report. Let's begin there." And that was it. Brenda's last power play. Dissolved in real time. The projector flicked on. Tom's spreadsheets lit up the wall like a courtroom indictment. Line after line, we walked through the fraud. $47,000 in no-bid contracts to her husband's fake company, payments timed to silence complaints, emergency assessments that coincided, with threats against her critics. Sarah Chen's camera clicked. Neighbors whispered. Several mouths hung open. Then Detective Walsh stood. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "when financial irregularities suggest criminal behavior, those documents stop being private. They become evidence." Brenda's face turned to stone. "This is harassment," she screamed. "This is a witch hunt." Elena stood slowly. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply told the room what Brenda had done to her. The lies. The false reports. The anonymous threats, the mailbox, the spray paint, the investigator tailing her after shifts, the attempt to destroy her career. Her voice never wavered. She tried to use children's safety as a weapon, Elena said, to silence a pediatric nurse. The room was silent. Then came the votes. Remove Brenda as president. 27 in favor, ban Kensington Gardens from contracts. Unanimous. Demand full restitution of stolen funds without hesitation. As Brenda gathered, her purse, heels clacking like retreating gunfire, Tom delivered the final blow. "Oh, Brenda, expect a lien notice by tomorrow morning. You might want to start packing." Brenda stormed out, but we stayed, because for the first time in years our neighborhood was ours again, and we weren't afraid of her anymore. The doorbell rang at 6:45 a.m. Brenda was back. Through the window, I saw her stomping up the walkway like a woman marching into battle. One hand clutched a large manila envelope like it held the power to undo everything. The other held her phone. Camera already recording, just in case she needed evidence for whatever drama she was about to unleash. I didn't flinch. I sipped my coffee, took a deep breath, and walked toward the door. Elena was already up. Still in her hospital. Scrubs. The scent of antiseptic lingering around her like invisible armor. She stood beside me silently as I opened the door. Brenda didn't even wait for a greeting. "I have legal papers," she snapped. "This circus you started, it ends now." She shoved the envelope toward my chest like a sword. "This is an injunction to stop your defamatory harassment campaign," she hissed. "Everything you said last night, lies, fabricated, conspiratorial nonsense." I looked past her. Mrs. Patterson peeked out from behind her ceramic frog collection across the street. Tom Martinez was leaning casually in his driveway, sipping. Coffee like this was a live show he'd paid good money to watch. A few other neighbors had emerged, too. Quiet, curious spectators drawn by the unmistakable sound of Brenda in crisis. I smiled. "Oh, good," I said calmly. "We were hoping to see you." I turned to Elena. "Honey, would you bring the envelope we've been waiting to deliver?" She disappeared inside, returned moments later with a thick legal packet sealed and stamped. The kind of envelope that smells like accountability and ends careers. I held it out toward Brenda with deliberate care, like presenting an award or delivering a sentence. "Brenda Kensington," I said, loud enough for our curious audience to hear. "You're being served," she blinked. "What is this?" she barked, fingers fumbling at the flap like it might burn her. "Property lien for fraudulent financial transfers," Elena said evenly, "plus criminal referrals for harassment, vandalism, and false police reports." The words didn't register at first. You could actually see her trying to blink them into something else, something deniable. "What are you talking about?" she muttered. "We followed the money," I said, "and so will the district attorney." The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of tires rolling up the street. Detective Walsh's patrol car pulled into our driveway. Right behind him, Sarah Chen's silver Honda slid to a stop, press badge visible on the dash, camera. "Ready." Brenda turned to see both cars, and that's when her expression changed. She knew. Walsh stepped out in uniform, calm, collected, clipboard in one hand, restraints on his belt glinting in the sun. He addressed her like he was ordering a coffee. "Mrs. Kensington," he said, "you are under arrest for filing false police reports, criminal harassment, vandalism of federal property, and intimidation of a witness." The gasp from across the street was unmistakable. Mrs. Patterson dropped her frog-shaped mug. Brenda stumbled back, eyes wide. "This is harassment!" she shrieked. "I was trying to protect the neighborhood. These people, they're criminals!" Tom Martinez started clapping. It was slow at first. One neighbor joined, then another. Soon half the block was applauding. The sound of justice, served hot with morning coffee. Walsh approached calmly. "You have the right to remain silent," he began, handcuffing Brenda with precision. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Brenda flinched as the cuffs clicked shut. "You'll all regret this," she screamed. "I have rights. I was the president." "You were," I said quietly. "And now you're just another HOA horror story." The door to the patrol car slammed shut with a cold finality that echoed across the lawn. Brenda's face twisted behind the glass as Walsh drove away. And just like that, the neighborhood bully was gone. Not in rumor, not in whispers, gone in cuffs. The air felt lighter, the trees looked taller. Even the mailbox seemed to stand straighter. Neighbors wandered over slowly, like villagers emerging after a long storm. Mrs. Patterson gave Elena a hug so tight she winced. "You didn't just stand up for yourselves," she whispered. "You stood up for all of us." Tom handed me a folder. "Her lien goes live at 9 a.m. I scheduled it with the county clerk. She can't sell, refinance, or breathe financially without seeing our paperwork." We spent the rest of the morning drinking victory coffee on our porch as Sarah Chen interviewed neighbors for her article. Her camera caught everything: the crowd, the applause, the moment of arrest. That evening, her story hit the front page. HOA president arrested in financial corruption and harassment scandal. Elena didn't smile when she read the headline. She just exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for 6 months. But the story wasn't over. Brenda pleaded guilty before trial. The evidence was overwhelming. Between the misappropriated funds, the unapproved contracts, and the security. Footage of her destroying our mailbox, she didn't stand a chance. She was fined over $65,000, including full restitution of HOA funds, penalties, interest, and legal fees. Her house was sold within a month. Frank disappeared from the neighborhood shortly after. His shell company shut down, his pride shattered. The for sale sign in Brenda's yard stood like a tombstone, but something else rose in its place. Hope. Elena received a formal apology from the hospital, along with a commendation for her professionalism during what they diplomatically called unprecedented personal harassment. Dr. Morrison even nominated her for the State Nursing Association's Community Impact Award. She didn't win, she didn't need to. Our community, the one Brenda tried to divide, came together in ways we never expected. With the $47,000 recovered, the neighborhood voted to create something lasting. We used part of the money to build a new playground, one designed with Elena's help to accommodate children with disabilities. Another portion went toward the Elena Martinez Pediatric Nursing Scholarship, a $15,000 fund to support local students pursuing careers in pediatric medicine. Elena cried when we unveiled it. The good kind of tears. The kind you earn. Tom Martinez, newly elected as HOA president by unanimous vote, implemented a radical transparency policy. Every expense, every contract, every receipt, posted online for all to see. "Trust but verify," he said at his first meeting. And in Brenda's case, we forgot the trust part. Sarah Chen's article triggered investigations across 3 counties. Several other HOA presidents were ousted. Her exposé won a statewide journalism award and led to a new bill requiring mandatory audits for any HOA managing over $50,000 in community funds. It was unofficially called the Brenda Prevention Act, but the biggest transformation wasn't legal. It was human. People who barely knew each other started sharing meals, planning, events, watching each other's kids. For the first time, Willowbrook Commons felt like a neighborhood instead of a collection of fences. 6 months later, I stood beside Elena as she organized our first annual Community Accountability Day. There were face-painting stations, barbecue, smoke in the air, laughter that carried down the block. Detective Walsh stopped by in civilian clothes and said, "Best arrest I ever made." He wasn't talking about a criminal, he was talking about a cancer that had finally been removed from the heart of our home. Elena squeezed my hand as we watched. Children climbed the brand new playground. You know what the best part is? She asked softly. What? She was right, Elena said with a grin. Some people really do think the rules don't apply to them? She paused. She just didn't know she was describing herself. Everyone saw the red spray paint on our garage door, but no one asked what it cost her soul. Not money, not property value, but the way Elena flinched when she stepped outside in the morning, the way she checked over her shoulder when unlocking her car, the way she hesitated before answering the door, even when it was just the mailman. This wasn't just about Brenda anymore. It was about every invisible wound she left behind, in Elena's voice, in her health, in her sense of safety. It's easy to think justice ends when the villain is gone, but some battles echo long after the final punch. We'd won, but now we had to rebuild. The morning after Brenda's arrest, our driveway was quiet. No watchers, no flyers, no damage. Just dew on the grass and that strange hush that follows a storm. The kind that makes you realize you've been shouting inside your own head for months. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and heard something I hadn't in weeks. Birds. Not just birds. Peace. Inside, Elena was organizing a new binder, but not for Brenda. This one was full of scholarship applications, letters from students, many of them first generation, who wanted to become pediatric nurses. The Elena Martinez scholarship had gone public just 2 days earlier, and already the community's inbox was overflowing. I watched her work, highlighter in one hand, heart in the other. No one asked her to lead this. No one assigned her the task, but that's Elena. She saves people, even when she doesn't have to. Later that afternoon, I found her in the backyard. She stood by the new playground, watching a group of kids climb and tumble across the padded equipment we'd funded with recovered HOA money. One girl struggled with a leg brace, but her laughter echoed louder than her frustration. Elena smiled. She reminds me of a patient I had once, she said quietly. Spina bifida. Loved the color purple. Called her wheelchair the spaceship. She paused, eyes still on the kids. Brenda thought this neighborhood was about order, about rules. But this is what community looks like. The playground had become a symbol, not just of justice, but of what we chose to build after. Brenda's reign had been rooted in fear. But what came next? That was about healing, and people were hungry for it. Tom Martinez held his first HOA board meeting that weekend. It wasn't in a stuffy room behind a locked door. It was outside, under a pop-up tent in the park with folding chairs and lemonade, and handouts printed in giant font for the older residents. He clicked through his PowerPoint with dry humor and IRS-level precision. Slide 7, he said, shows how Brenda double-billed us for non-existent mulch. That's right. We paid twice to not receive something. The neighbors laughed, but underneath the jokes, there was awe. Transparency wasn't just refreshing, it was revolutionary. Each slide built confidence. Each receipt passed around became a symbol of trust. By the time he wrapped, no one wanted to leave. Mrs. Patterson, usually quiet, stood up at the end. She had a printed list, notes scribbled in the margins, sticky flags on the pages. You'd think she was preparing a Supreme Court argument. I just want to say, she began, for the first time in 15 years, I feel like I belong here. She turned to Elena. You didn't just fight for your home. You gave us ours back. Elena didn't speak. She just nodded, a soft smile tugging at the corner of her mouth, one of the rare ones. The kind that says thank you without needing a single word. That night, our porch light flicked on as the sun dipped below the tree line. Elena brought out 2 cups of mint tea, the ones we only used on calm nights. We sat in silence for a while, watching the streetlights buzz awake. You okay? I asked finally. She sipped her tea. I'm not afraid anymore, she said. She paused, then laughed softly. I don't check the mailbox like it's a trap. I didn't realize until then that I'd been doing the same thing. Healing is quiet. It doesn't announce itself with sirens or court documents. It arrives slowly, like sleep after too many restless nights. And sometimes healing comes disguised as something else entirely. Tuesday morning, we received a letter. It was from Elena's, former patient's family, the one with the spaceship wheelchair. They'd read Sarah Chen's article, recognized Elena's photo, and sent a message that felt more like a prayer than a thank you. You helped our daughter believe in herself, it said. Now you've helped a whole neighborhood do the same. I read it aloud, Elena cried, and for the first time those tears weren't about fear. They weren't from exhaustion or anxiety or dread. They were release. Later that week, we got a call from Attorney Martinez. She had a new nickname around the legal circuit, the Kensington Slayer. HOA communities across 3 counties had started reaching out. Some wanted help investigating shady finances. Others just needed someone to show up and tell them they weren't crazy for thinking something was wrong. We agreed to speak at a town hall for a neighborhood 30 miles away. Elena didn't want to at first, said she wasn't a public speaker, but the minute she walked into that room full of scared, tired residents, mostly elderly, mostly silenced, something shifted. She stood in front of the microphone and told our story, not just the facts, the feelings. The moment she found the note in our mailbox that read, "Some people don't belong here." The day she saw her car keyed, and it made her feel disposable, the first time she thought maybe we should just leave, and then she told them why we stayed. She ended with a sentence I'll never forget. Bullies don't care who you are until they realize who you are with. That night, she got a standing ovation. She didn't cry this time. She stood tall, because Elena, the nurse, the wife, the target of Brenda's war, had become something new. She was a symbol, a quiet warrior who never asked for a fight, but fought anyway, and won. The weeks that followed were full of things that would have felt unthinkable just a few months earlier. Neighborhood kids knocked on our door to ask Elena to be their science fair mentor. Local news stations requested interviews. A parent group from the hospital sent her a fruit basket with a note. You're what courage looks like. But the moment that mattered most came in the form of 3 words, from a neighbor we'd never spoken to, a single mother named Janelle who lived 2 houses down. I feel safe, she said. Not grateful, not inspired, just safe. That was the real reward, not headlines. Not applause, but peace. The kind Brenda had spent years trying to hoard for herself by silencing everyone else. Now, that peace belonged to all of us, and Elena, she finally slept through the night. Some victories echo louder in silence than they ever did in shouting. 6 months ago, our block was a battlefield. Now, it sounded like laughter. The kind that spills from backyard barbecues and birthday parties, from kids playing tag between driveways. No sirens, no arguments, just life, finally unbothered. Elena was in the garden, planting lavender. The smell drifted into the kitchen window like peace made real. She hummed a little as she worked. I hadn't heard her hum in months. That's when it really hit me. Brenda was gone. But what mattered more was what remained: community. Because here's the thing about bullies. They don't just try to control people, they try to isolate them. Make them feel like no one will stand beside them when things get hard. That was Brenda's entire playbook: divide, intimidate, control. But when she fell, something unexpected happened. We didn't just get rid of a tyrant, we found each other. Neighbors who used to wave from driveways now sat together at folding tables, playing cards and sharing stories. Kids who had been told to keep their voices down now filled the streets with joy. And the recovered money? It didn't just sit in some fund collecting dust. We made it mean something. Tom Martinez, who'd become our unofficial CFO, printed out pie charts for the next HOA meeting. not because anyone asked, but because he believed in making it plain. $15,000 to the Elena Martinez Pediatric Nursing Scholarship, he announced, because we invest in those who care for the most vulnerable. The room applauded. $20,000 to the new inclusive playground, he continued, because every child deserves to feel safe. Another round of clapping. And $5,000 to a neighborhood emergency fund, he added. No more GoFundMe links when someone's house floods or their furnace dies. We take care of our own now. The vote to approve it? Unanimous. Even Dorothy Pratt, who once backed Brenda blindly, raised her hand. She cried as she did it, said she was sorry, said she didn't know. The truth is, most people didn't. That's how manipulation works. But now they were awake. And something else changed too. The HOA itself. What was once a tool of control became a mechanism for fairness, for transparency, for neighborly problem solving instead of punishment. Tom set up a new system. Monthly updates, open contracts, competitive bids. Anyone could ask questions, and every board member had to rotate after 2 years. No more long-term rule by ego. Elena's law, someone joked. We laughed, but it stuck. Meanwhile, the story kept growing. Sarah Chen's reporting won awards. First local, then state. Her headline, When the HOA Becomes the Oppressor. Beneath it, a photo of Elena standing in front of the new playground, surrounded by children, smiling so wide it looked like the sun. That article didn't just win her praise. It lit fires in other neighborhoods. Suddenly, Brenda wasn't just one person, she was a type, and communities across the state started naming it and fighting it. Attorney Martinez, our legal warrior, began receiving cases weekly. Retirement communities, condos, suburbs with too many rules and not enough heart. We're calling it the Kensington treatment, she said with a chuckle one night over dinner. I'm building a firm around it, Elena laughed, as long as no one builds a statue of me, but the impact was very real. Within 3 months, the state legislature passed a new bill, mandatory independent audits for HOAs managing over $50,000, public access to records, limits on no-bid contracts, transparency rules with real teeth. The BEAR, unofficial name, the Brenda Prevention Act. Even the governor mentioned it in a press conference. Accountability starts on the smallest streets, he said. And sometimes it takes a nurse and a tape measure to remind us what fairness looks like. The applause that followed was genuine. Back in Willowbrook Commons, the street started to change in small but meaningful ways. The Johnsons repainted their garage door, the one Brenda once fined them over. This time they added a mural, kids playing basketball, vibrant colors, movement, life. Mrs. Patterson planted new garden gnomes, 6 of them this time. One wore scrubs and a tiny clipboard. That said, AA this. She named it Brenda. Elena nearly fell over laughing when she saw it. And me? I finally stopped checking the driveway every morning like it was a crime scene. Instead, I started walking the block again, waving at Tom, checking on Janelle and her son, helping with fences and sprinkler systems and broken porch lights. Just life. Normal, beautiful, quiet life. Until one Tuesday morning, the mail came. Inside the bundle was a plain white envelope. No return address, postmarked from 2 counties over. Inside, a business card, bent, smudged, cheap HOA defense specialist, free consultation, payment plans available, and a handwritten note scribbled in blue ink. This isn't over, you made enemies. No signature. No surprise who sent it, but it didn't rattle me. Instead, I walked it over to the shredder, dropped it in, and let it disappear, because that's what fear thrives on. Attention. And Brenda? She didn't deserve even that anymore. The real final act of this story didn't happen in a courtroom. It happened at a cookout, Community Accountability Day, the first of what would become an annual tradition. Picnic tables lined the block. Chalk drawings covered the sidewalks. Kids sprayed each other with water guns while parents passed around potato salad and laughter like sacred traditions. Elena stood at the head of the playground handing out scholarships, real ones, printed, on thick paper bearing her name. Each recipient got a stethoscope too, a reminder that kindness can be fierce, that healing is a form of resistance. Near the end of the event, Detective Walsh stopped by, civilian clothes, big grin, plate of Elena's lemon bars in one hand. "Best arrest I ever made," he said. "Usually I arrest people who harm communities. That time, I got to arrest the community's biggest problem. Everyone raised a toast. Lemonade, of course." Tom spoke next. "Here's to the day we stopped being neighbors on paper," he said, "and started being one in spirit." And Elena, she didn't speak. She just looked around at the laughter, the kids, the people who once lived in fear of a clipboard, and smiled. Because she didn't need to say anything, she'd already said it with every quiet act of resistance, every shift at the ICU, every night she didn't give up, every moment she refused to disappear. What started on our street lit a fuse that stretched across the county. Elena didn't ask to be the face of a movement. She just wanted to park in her own driveway. But sometimes the most ordinary people, the quiet ones, the tired ones, the ones who don't seek attention, end up changing everything. After the story broke, our inbox filled with messages, not just from neighbors, from strangers, couples, single parents, elderly residents from HOA-run condos in towns we'd never even heard of. They weren't asking for legal advice. They were asking how we did it, how we kept going, how we didn't break when the president of our HOA tried to turn an entire community against us. Elena would sit by the window in the mornings, tea in hand, reading message after message with that same stillness she used when holding a newborn in the ICU. "My HOA banned me from hanging laundry," one woman wrote. "Said it looked poor. I'm a widow. Hanging clothes outside saves me $20 a week. They threatened to fine me $200. Another said, "I was fined for having a toy in the front yard. My son has autism. That toy keeps him grounded. When I refused to remove it, they threatened eviction." We realized Brenda wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom of a deeper problem, one buried beneath manicured lawns and laminated bylaws. Power without accountability, and fear disguised as standards. But the difference between those stories and ours, we documented everything. We got organized, and most importantly, we refused to be quiet. So we decided to help. Elena teamed up with attorney Martinez and Sarah Chen to create a guide, Fighting HOA Tyranny, a community toolkit. It had everything: how to read bylaws, how to file complaints, how to track spending, how to demand financial transparency without sounding like a conspiracy theorist. We released it as a free PDF. By the end of the first week, it had been downloaded 18,000 times. By the end of the month, over $100,000. People printed it out, shared it at community centers, uploaded YouTube videos reading it aloud page by page. Even the local library started offering it as part of their homeowner resources. Tom Martinez called it the HOA Bible for the bullied. And something else started happening too. Other Brendas started falling. In town after town, residents began attending meetings they'd skipped for years. They asked for financial reports. They formed independent oversight committees. They brought measuring tape and cameras and printouts. Suddenly, the clipboard didn't scare anyone anymore. Elena got invited to speak at 3 city council forums. She turned them all down. "I'm not a politician," she told me. "I just didn't want to be erased." But one invitation changed her mind. It came from the State Nursing Association, the same one that had once warned her about harassment policies. They asked her to deliver the keynote address at their annual Pediatric Nursing Summit. Her topic, resilience in the face of retaliation. I watched her stand on stage that night. She wore a simple navy blue blazer, her hospital badge still clipped to her belt. No makeup. No frills. Just Elena. She told the crowd what it felt like to have someone try to destroy your career over where you live. What it felt like to walk out to your car and see your name slashed across it in red paint. What it felt like to wonder if your neighbors thought you were dangerous just because someone else shouted louder. Then she paused, looked around the room full of nurses. "I save children's lives," she said. But for a while I forgot how to fight for my own. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. She received a standing ovation. Back home, things kept improving. The playground stayed full. HOA meetings became potlucks. Neighbors began using phrases like shared purpose and collective well-being. Even our mail carrier started smiling more. But one thing lingered, quietly, like a ghost. Brenda's house, empty now, windows dark, grass growing wild. A for sale sign leaning like it had given up. I passed it every morning, and every morning I remembered her standing on our porch, screaming "trespasser" at my wife like she was claiming stolen land. But that house wasn't a threat anymore. It was a lesson, a monument to what happens when you use rules to harm instead of protect. One evening, I noticed a boy, maybe 10, riding his bike past the house, slowing down to stare at the wilted rose bushes out front. "Did she really go to jail?" he asked when he saw me watching. I nodded. He looked up at me. "My mom said your wife's a hero." That night I told Elena. She just smiled, shook her head, and said, "I'm not." But I could see it in her eyes. She believed it, just a little. A month later, Brenda's house finally sold. A young couple moved in with a baby and a pit bull named Daisy. No complaints. No drama. Just people looking for peace. We welcomed them with muffins and lemonade. It felt normal, like we'd never known any other version of this block. But of course we had. We remembered the fear, the humiliation, the anger, the exhaustion, and that memory became our foundation. Not to dwell in, but to build from. Because if you forget where you came from, you forget what you had to fight through. And we fought for every inch. One night I asked Elena what she would say to Brenda if she ever saw her again. She was quiet for a long time, then said, "Thank you." I blinked. "What?" "I'd say thank you," she repeated, "for making me prove to myself how strong I really am." That answer stuck with me, because she didn't need Brenda's apology. She had her own, her voice, her dignity, her community, and that was more than Brenda ever had to begin with. Peace is strange when you've lived without it. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It creeps in like sunlight through a curtain you forgot to close. Soft, warm, almost suspicious. You keep expecting it to disappear. That's what it was like for Elena. Everyone else had moved on. The flyers were gone, the fines erased. The board meetings now opened with potluck menus instead of shouting matches. Brenda's house had been sold, her lien repaid, her sentence served. But peace? Peace hadn't landed all the way. Not for her. I noticed it first on a Tuesday morning. Elena was packing her hospital bag, scrubs folded neatly, coffee cooling beside her, badge already clipped. But her hands were trembling, just slightly, so slight you'd miss it if you didn't know her. I did. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded quickly. "Fine, just tired." But it wasn't just that. Later that week, I caught her checking the rearview mirror too many times on the drive to the grocery store. She laughed it off when I asked, said it was habit. But I knew what it really was. Brenda's shadow, still reaching. Some wounds don't scar neatly. They fray. They catch in places you thought had healed, and even though justice had been served, the memory of being stalked, watched, doubted. It lingered. It wasn't about Brenda anymore. It was about safety. One night, after dinner, Elena stood on the porch staring at the neighborhood. The playground lights glowed softly across the park. Laughter floated from 2 houses over, but she didn't smile. "You ever wonder," she said, "how much of me she actually took?" I didn't know how to answer. She wasn't talking about property lines or lawsuits. She meant identity, pride, ease. I'd seen her carry a newborn out of respiratory arrest without breaking a sweat. I'd watched her walk into a room full of panicked parents and bring calm like a curtain falling. But one woman with a clipboard nearly unraveled all of that. Not because Brenda was powerful, but because Brenda was relentless. That was the trick, wasn't it? Brenda didn't win through logic or law. She won, for a while, through wearing people down, making them question their own reality, their place, their worth. Elena had survived her storm. But surviving isn't the same as healing, so I did something that scared me more than I'd admit. I suggested she take a break from work, just a few weeks, time off. Not because she was weak, but because she wasn't. Because healing, real healing, takes strength. She hesitated. "I don't want them to think I'm fragile," she said. "You're not," I told her, "but you are human." She stared at me for a long moment, then finally nodded. The hospital supported her fully. She started sleeping again. No more 3 a.m. wake-ups. No more checking locks 3 times. We went to the farmer's market. We rebuilt our garden. We made dinner for neighbors just because, and slowly, she started smiling again. But then came the letter. No return address. Just our names typed in blocky black font on the envelope. Inside, a single sheet. 1 sentence. "How long until they turn on you?" No name, no explanation, just fear. Packaged in cream-colored paper. We sat at the table in silence. Elena stared at the words like they were poison. I reached for her hand. She pulled away. "I'm fine," she said, but I knew she wasn't. The letter didn't scare her because it threatened anything physical. It scared her because it asked the question she'd secretly been asking herself. What if it all fell apart again? What if the support vanished the second it got hard? Brenda may have left the neighborhood, but her doubt still lived here. The next day, we turned it in to Detective Walsh. He ran prints. Nothing. Could be a former supporter, could be a copycat, or just someone trying to stir the pot. He said, "Either way, it's not a threat, but I'm keeping it on file." We thanked him. But as we walked back to the car, I could feel the tension rising in Elena's shoulders again. Like old armor she thought she'd buried. That night, she didn't sleep. By morning, the spark in her voice had dulled again. Quiet. Clipped. Functioning, but not present. She poured coffee, forgot to drink it, folded laundry, then refolded the same shirt 3 times. Finally, she sat at the kitchen table and whispered something I'll never forget. "I think I'm broken." The words sat there like shattered glass between us, and it crushed me. Not just because she said it, but because I believed her. Once. Not now, but back when it all started. I remembered that first week, the fine, the look in her eyes after Brenda called her this person. The way she shrank into herself, questioning her right to stand on her own porch. I had believed the damage was permanent, but it wasn't. She had rebuilt herself, and if she could do it once, she could do it again. So I reached across the table, took her hand. "Elena, you're not broken," I said. "You're bruised, tired, but you are still standing, and people don't stand after everything you've stood through if they're broken." Her fingers tightened around mine. "But what if they do turn on us?" she asked quietly. "What if it was all just performance?" I shook my head. "They won't," I said, "and if they do, we've already proven we'll stand alone if we have to." That night, she opened the binder we hadn't touched in months. Not the legal one, the one filled with thank you letters from parents, students, nurses, neighbors. She read them aloud, slowly. Some were typed, some written in crayons, one from a 6-year-old who called her the hero nurse who beat the mean frog lady. She laughed at that, genuinely, and it broke something open in her again, in a good way. By morning, she was different. Not fixed, but ready. The next community meeting, she stood in front of the entire HOA. The same room where she'd once been accused, humiliated, nearly erased. But this time, she held a microphone, and her voice didn't tremble. "I want to address the letter that's been circulating," she said, "the one that asked how long it would take for you to turn on us." She looked around the room, eyes steady. "I don't know who sent it. Maybe someone in this room. Maybe not. But here's what I do know." She paused. "You already answered that question 6 months ago, when you stood up for what was right. And if you ever forget how strong you were that night, I'll remind you." Silence. Then applause. Then standing ovation. No one turned. Not that night. Not since. Because the truth was, we hadn't just survived Brenda. We'd survived the silence she created. The fear she fed. And now? Now we weren't just homeowners. We were a community. And Elena? She wasn't just the woman who beat Brenda. She was the reason none of us would ever let another Brenda rise again. The letter stayed in a drawer. We didn't shred it. We didn't frame it. We just kept it. Not as a warning, not as a trophy, but as a reminder that even after the arrests, the lawsuits, the applause, the shadows still linger. And that healing is never one dramatic moment. It's a choice to keep showing up, to keep planting gardens where someone else tried to salt the earth, to keep being visible even when you feel like disappearing. The spring after it all ended, Elena returned to work, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. And something was different now. She didn't walk into that hospital room quietly anymore. She walked in with presence. She'd been tested. And somehow she carried that test with her, like armor under the scrubs. Her patients noticed it, their parents noticed it, and so did her colleagues. The hospital board, the same one that once cautioned her about public image and professional distance, voted unanimously to name her the new lead pediatric trauma nurse. At the ceremony, Dr. Morrison gave a short speech. "Every hospital needs a hero," he said. "We just didn't expect ours to come from a courtroom instead of a crisis room." The audience laughed. Elena didn't. She just nodded, eyes misty, proud, quiet, unshaken. That same month, our neighborhood hosted the second annual Community Accountability Day. It was bigger this time. Local vendors, face painting, a music stage, even a dunk tank with Tom Martinez sitting smugly above the water in a t-shirt that read, "Transparent since 2024. Kids screamed with joy. Elena handed out the scholarship awards on stage, one by one, stethoscope in hand, like a knight-knighting future warriors. Each student thanked her. Some hugged her, one cried. She held each one for a second longer than expected. She knew what it meant, to be seen, to be chosen, to be told. You belong here, no matter what anyone says. Sarah Chen returned, now working on a documentary about HOA abuse, nationwide. She brought a film crew and followed us for 3 days. Interviews, walkthroughs, old security footage, legal records. At the end of the last shoot, she asked Elena a question she hadn't asked anyone else. If you could go back to the day Brenda left that first citation on your windshield, what would you do differently? Elena smiled. I'd leave a note of my own. What would it say? Elena looked at the camera. Nice try. The doc went viral. Millions of views in the first week. News interviews followed. HOA oversight bills in 2 other states picked up traction, citing Elena's case. But none of that was the real ending. The real ending came quietly, on a Monday morning, a knock at the door. Not police, not lawyers, just a woman. Late 50s, nervous, smile. Holding a tray of brownies wrapped in foil, she introduced herself as Sharon. She'd just moved into the old Kensington house. She hesitated before speaking again. "I heard everything," she said. "From the neighbors. Online. I thought, maybe, I shouldn't come by." Elena stepped forward. "Why not?" Sharon looked down. "I didn't want the house's history to follow me." Elena didn't miss a beat, then rewrite it. She took the brownies, invited her in, and introduced her to everyone at the park an hour later. By sunset, Sharon was playing cornhole with the Johnsons, history rewritten, not erased, reclaimed. That evening, as the lights came on and the laughter faded, we sat on our porch, same place we always returned to. Elena leaned her head against my shoulder. "You know what I realized?" she said softly. "What?" Brenda thought this place belonged to her. I nodded. She tried to make it hers. Elena smiled. But it always belonged to us. She just made us prove it. I looked out at the street. It didn't look perfect. There were still weeds in the sidewalk cracks, a dent in Tom's mailbox from his kids' baseball practice, a crooked street sign no one had gotten around to fixing, but it was ours, unpolished. "Real, alive." Elena stood. "I want to walk," she said. So we did, past the playground, past Mrs. Patterson's house, now lit up with gnome-sized solar lights, past the new family who just moved in with twins and a tire swing. At the end of the block, a little girl on a scooter rode by and waved at Elena. "Hi, Nurse Elena," she waved back. A few steps later, another kid shouted from a window, "We made thank you cards at school today." "You're in mine," Elena laughed. "I can't wait to see it." And I realized the woman who was once called a trespasser on her own street was now the heart of it. She wasn't fighting to belong anymore. She was the reason others felt like they did. We reached the corner and turned around, and as we walked back, hand in hand, I looked over at her and asked, "Do you ever miss the quiet?" She smirked. Not the wrong kind of quiet. She was right. The kind of quiet that comes from fear, from hiding, from keeping your head down so no one notices you. That wasn't peace. What we had now was noisy, messy, joyful, and earned. The story didn't end when Brenda left. It didn't end with the court date. It didn't even end with the scholarship fund or the new bylaws, or the letters from strangers saying thank you for showing us how. The story ends here, with a woman who didn't ask to be the voice of justice, but became one, with a husband who thought the best way to fight was to stay quiet, and learned that sometimes love means getting loud, and with a neighborhood that now knew, you don't keep peace with rules. You build it with people.